At dinner, my own mom smashed a plate across my face. I bled, and my dad said even trash has more worth than me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily Carter. I was 19 when this happened. I wasn't a loud or troublesome kid. Most of the time I kept to myself, read books, worked shifts at a local diner and quietly dreamed about going to college one day. Nobody in my house ever encouraged me, but I still saved every dollar I could in secret, hoping one day I'd get away. That night at dinner things already felt heavy. My parents didn't speak to me unless it was to criticize. My younger brother Jason sat at the table, smirking the way he always did when he knew I was about to be the target. Mom had cooked and Dad was already drinking. It wasn't new, just the same tension that lived in our house every evening. Mom started picking at me because my grades weren't good enough for her standards. She said, "Why bother with books, Emily? You'll never be anything but a disappointment." Normally I would stay quiet, just swallow it down, but for some reason I said, "Maybe if you actually supported me I'd have a chance." The room froze. Jason laughed under his breath and Dad looked up with a glare. My mom's face twisted in anger. Before I could even realize what was happening, she grabbed her plate full of food and slammed it across my face. The sound of shattering glass mixed with my own gasp. Sharp edges cut my skin and I felt the warm trickle of blood running down my cheek. I sat there stunned, hand pressed to my face, while Jason laughed louder like it was the funniest thing he had ever seen. I looked at my dad, hoping maybe, just maybe, he would finally defend me. But instead he leaned back in his chair, shook his head and said, "Even trash has more worth than you, Emily." The words hit harder than the plate. I felt myself sink, but at the same time something inside me lit up. It wasn't hope and it wasn't sadness. It was like a cold fire, a hardness I had never felt before. I pushed back from the table, chair scraping against the floor. Nobody stopped me, nobody cared. I walked to the bathroom, blood still dripping, and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked pathetic, beaten down, but my eyes, they didn't look the same. For the first time I wasn't just sad. I was angry. And in that anger a small voice whispered to me, "This isn't the end. This is the start." I didn't know how, but in that moment I promised myself I would never let them break me again. I sat alone later that night, the sting on my cheek still fresh, and memories came back to me one by one like old wounds ripping open. It wasn't just that dinner. It had been my whole life. Growing up, I always felt like the extra piece that didn't belong. My brother Jason was the golden child and I was the problem no one wanted. If he wanted something, he got it. New clothes, new games, birthday parties that filled the house with laughter. I stood in the corner watching, holding back tears because I knew no one was ever going to celebrate me that way. I remembered being 7, standing on stage during a school recital, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Every other kid had someone clapping for them. My seat in the audience stayed empty. I tried to keep singing, but my voice cracked. I told myself maybe they got stuck in traffic, but deep down I knew they just didn't care enough to show up. When my birthday came around each year, Jason always had gifts piled on the table. Maybe a card if someone remembered. One year, Dad told me I should be grateful just to have a roof over my head. Mom laughed and said, "We don't waste money on lost causes." Those words burned into me like a brand I could never erase. Jason was cruel in ways only a younger brother spoiled rotten could be. He'd take my things, rip pages out of my books, or call me names loud enough to echo down the hallway. The worst part wasn't even him. It was that whenever I tried to defend myself, Mom and Dad rushed to protect him. "Don't pick on your brother," Mom would snap at me. Dad would glare and tell me to stop being dramatic. Jason would stand behind them, smiling like he had won. The house never had room for kindness, only rules and silence. Dad's presence alone was enough to make the air heavy. He spoke like his words were final, sharp and cold, as though even asking a question was a crime. Mom was different but no softer. Her tongue was quick, her insults sharper than knives. I learned early that nothing I did would ever be enough. I replayed all of it in my head. The empty chairs at my events, the birthdays that passed like any other day, the nights I cried quietly into my pillow while Jason bragged about how much Mom and Dad adored him. It wasn't just one moment that broke me. It was years of being dismissed, of being told without words and with words that I didn't matter. That night, staring into the mirror, I felt it clearly for the first time. This wasn't a single cruel dinner. This was a lifetime of being cast aside, and I couldn't shake the thought forming in me. If they had made me nothing, then one day I would make myself into something they could never ignore. A week passed and the cut on my face had already turned into a faint scar, but the memory of that night never left me. I tried to keep my head down to stay invisible in my own house. But one evening I gathered enough courage to bring up something that had been burning inside me for months. I found Mom in the kitchen wiping down the counter. My voice shook a little, but I forced the words out. "I've been looking at colleges. I want to apply." She froze for a second, then turned, her lips curling into the kind of smile that made my stomach twist. A laugh burst out of her, sharp and cruel. "You? College? Don't make me laugh. You're too dumb, too ugly, and too useless to survive out there." She shook her head like the very idea was a joke. I stood there holding my breath, hoping maybe Dad would step in, that he'd say something different. But when he walked in and overheard, he didn't hesitate. "We're not wasting money on that. I won't give you a single dollar. You'll never make it anyway." His words landed with finality, like a door slamming in my face. Jason came into the room at just the right moment, grinning like he'd been waiting for this. "Why bother?" he sneered. "You're basically the family maid. Who's gonna clean up after us if you run off?" His laughter echoed, cutting deeper than any insult I'd ever heard. I felt my chest tighten, my throat closing. My vision blurred, and I couldn't hold it together any longer. I turned away before they could see the tears, stormed up the stairs, and locked myself in my room. My hands shook as I buried my face in the pillow, muffling the sobs I couldn't control. Every cruel word replayed in my head like a broken record. Too dumb. Too ugly. Useless. Wait. Each one struck like a hammer, crushing what little strength I had left. I cried until I couldn't breathe, until my body ached. But somewhere in that storm of pain, a different feeling began to grow. I wiped my face, sat up on the bed, and stared at the cracked ceiling above me. If this house was going to keep me small, then I had to leave it behind. I couldn't rely on them, and I couldn't wait for their approval. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't write it down. But in the silence of my room, I made a vow so deep it felt like it was carved into me. I would get out. I would make something of myself, and one day they would see me standing higher than they ever believed I could. That night my tears dried and the fire inside me took root. The breaking point wasn't the end. It was the beginning of revenge. The morning after that breakdown, I woke up with swollen eyes but a sharper mind. If I couldn't rely on them, I had to rely on myself. That very week, I begged for more hours at the diner where I already worked weekends. The manager agreed, and soon I was pulling double shifts, often staying until closing. The work was exhausting, balancing trays, cleaning tables, smiling through aching feet. But it gave me something I had never felt before: control. Every tip, every paycheck, it was mine. I stopped buying little things for myself, even food on breaks. Instead, I tucked the cash away into a shoebox under my bed, hidden behind old clothes. Watching the pile grow, even slowly, made me feel alive in a way I hadn't known. It was at the diner that I met Samantha, or Sam, a 21-year-old who had been working there longer than me. She was quick-witted, always cracking jokes while wiping down counters, and she didn't look at me like I was invisible. One late shift, when the place was quiet, she nudged me and said, "You're too quiet for this job, but I like you." It was the first time anyone had said they liked me without sarcasm. From then on, she became the closest thing to a friend I'd ever had. Sam taught me tricks to earn better tips. Little things like remembering customers' names or noticing if someone preferred extra cream in their coffee. I started trying, and it worked. Customers began asking for me, leaving bigger bills on the table. My boss pulled me aside one night and said, "You're good with people. Keep it up." Those words stuck with me because they were so rare. Every night, no matter how drained I felt, I'd count the money carefully before slipping it into the shoebox. Sometimes I'd run my fingers over the edges of the bills, imagining them turning into a bus ticket, an application fee, or a deposit on a tiny apartment far away from the walls that kept crushing me. Back at home, nothing changed. Mom still found reasons to insult me. Dad ignored me unless it was to criticize, and Jason kept playing the prince of the house. Their words still stung, but something in me had shifted. I didn't react the way I used to. Instead, I'd nod, walk away, and think about the diner, the tips, the shoebox, and Sam's laughter after a long shift. Little by little, I felt myself pulling away from the chains they had wrapped around me. Their cruelty didn't define me as much anymore. I wasn't just their scapegoat. I was becoming someone with a plan. For the first time in my life, independence wasn't just a dream. It was starting to take shape right in my hands. One night after closing at the diner, I walked home with sore legs but a quiet pride. I had earned decent tips that day, and all I could think about was adding the bills to my hidden stash. Climbing the stairs to my room, I went straight to the closet, pushed aside the pile of old sweaters, and reached for the shoebox. It wasn't there. My chest tightened. I tore through the closet, pulled everything onto the floor, searched under the bed, even checked the dresser drawers though I knew I hadn't moved it. Panic rose in my throat. That shoebox had been my lifeline, the only proof that my dream could be real. I stormed into the hallway and found Jason lounging on the couch with a smug grin plastered across his face. "Looking for something?" he said without me even asking. The tone in his voice made my stomach drop. "What did you do with it?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He stretched, enjoying every second. "Oh, that. I handed it to Dad. Said he needed beer money. Thought I'd be a good son for once." I froze. The blood drained from my face. "That was mine," I whispered, but my voice cracked. Mom walked in holding a dish towel and Dad followed with a can already in his hand. When they saw me standing there shaking, they both burst out laughing. Dad raised his drink and said, "See? That's what happens when you dream too big." Mom smirked, her eyes cold. "Maybe this will finally teach you your place." Jason leaned back, enjoying the show, while I stood in the middle of the room with tears burning behind my eyes. All those months of double shifts, skipped meals, aching feet, all of it gone in an instant, stolen and tossed away like it meant nothing. Something inside me broke. Not the quiet sadness I had carried for years, but something sharper, harder. My hands curled into fists at my sides as I stared at each of them, memorizing their laughter, their faces, their words. I realized then that it wasn't just about money. It was about crushing me whenever I dared to hope. I walked back to my room without another word, shut the door and sat on the floor surrounded by the mess I had made, tearing the closet apart. The empty space where that shoebox had been felt like a grave. But in that emptiness something new was born. I swore, silently and with every part of me, that I would never forgive them for this. They had taken the only thing I had, and in return I would take back my power. Revenge wasn't just an idea anymore. It became the reason I would keep moving forward. Sam noticed the change in me long before I said a word. After one late shift, when the diner lights were dim and the floor still smelled of bleach, she asked softly, "What's keeping you there?" I didn't answer, but she must have seen the truth in my silence. A few days later she told me her aunt had a spare room. "It's nothing fancy, but it's safe. You don't have to stay where you're not wanted." That offer sat heavy in my chest for days, like a secret I was afraid to touch. But after losing everything I had worked for, there wasn't anything tying me down anymore. One night, when the house was quiet and Jason was asleep, I pulled an old backpack from under my bed. I stuffed in a change of clothes, a toothbrush, a worn notebook, and the few tips I had left from recent shifts. That was all I could take, but it felt like more than I had ever owned. I slipped out the back door without making a sound. No one noticed me leave. No footsteps followed. For a second, I turned to glance at the house that had raised me, hoping for some pull of regret. Instead, I only felt hollow. The next morning, neighbors noticed I was gone before my family did. I overheard later from someone at the diner that my parents laughed about it, telling people I had probably run off because I couldn't handle responsibility. Jason joked that the house felt cleaner without me. They didn't worry, didn't search, didn't even pretend to care. Their mockery spread through the street like gossip, and I knew then that I had made the right choice. Still, when I reached Sam's aunt's house and set my backpack down in the corner of the small spare room, I broke down. The tears came in waves, heavy and unstoppable, not because I missed home but because the weight on my chest had finally started to lift. For the first time in my life I was free from their walls, their rules, their cruelty. The silence in that room was different, gentle, not suffocating. Relief didn't erase the pain, but it gave me space to breathe. I cried until the exhaustion gave way to a strange calm, a feeling I had never known. The chains were slipping off, one by one, and in their place was a fragile kind of strength. The road ahead was uncertain. I had no savings anymore, only my job at the diner and the kindness of Sam's family. But as I lay down on the unfamiliar bed that night, I felt something stirring inside me. I wasn't just running away, I was starting over. And from that point on, every step I took would be mine alone.